let's start, Alan. You've had a quite unique career journey. Can you tell us a bit more about that journey?
Certainly, thank you. Well, first, hello everyone. What an honor to be here and to hear your papers, and thank you to Rebecca for that wonderful introduction. You know, one thing I've learned from those of you I've spoken with this morning is how intentional you all were in selecting your career path. I can't say that I was more lucky, but one of the very lucky things that happened to me back in 1981 is I ended up at Apple in the very early days, where I had the opportunity to learn from an extraordinary mentor, Steve Jobs, obviously, who led that company with a way that really caused us all to find courage to take risks in the decisions we made, the work that we did. And then also to remember the important nature of teamwork and of collaborating with others to elicit cultures of excellence. So from those early roots, I've had many adventures, none of them quite like that, but when Apple was going through changes, I kind of stumbled psychologically. I had felt so fulfilled and so inspired to be creative in the early time at Apple. And then when changes came to the company, I didn't understand why things felt a little bit more shut down. That. Don't we all seek to be of service at a high level in a way that brings positive change and benefit to the world? So that has been a driving force in my career and my professional adventures for very many years.
Okay. You've worked at some of the biggest named companies in the world. What are your takeaways from your time in these companies? But just 1 minute. Please, could you fix here in front? Because it's all the time, it's an interference. Are you on? Good. So you can go on, please.
You know, Rebecca, I think the biggest takeaway is culture is everything. The environments in which we work shape the way that we work. So cultures that allow people to feel inspired and creative and to really have the courage to take risks, you know, to show up with their own individual intelligence to make an impact, those cultures are very different from cultures where you feel that you kind of have to watch over your shoulder, or, you know, you feel like it is competitive or hierarchical in a way where you are being evaluated and downgraded for reasons that really aren't about you, but that are more about the culture. So the key point I'd want to make is the culture that we create creates the work that we deliver. And getting culture right, and especially in high-stakes environments like the ones that each of you work in, having it be a place that is really about elevating excellence, not competing to prove excellence. Do you all get a sense of that difference? Yes, so that is what I think is the most important thing. Over the decades, I've worked with many companies to establish systems of values, systems of cultural agreements, so people, a little concert going on, huh? People have the predictability to focus on what they are excellent at rather than worry about the things that might get in their way or in their path if they don't meet someone else's approval or if they don't fit in some ways. A lifetime of learning has really taught me how amazing people are when they wish to be excellent. And I find that the biggest obstacle to people showing up with that excellence is really the culture around them. By the way, when I did teach at Stanford, I taught a course that I love teaching called The Neuroscience of Creativity and Innovation. And in that course were many executives from different companies across Silicon Valley. And I consistently found a difference between the people who had cultures where risk-taking and excellence was accepted, allowed, encouraged, and those where people had to sort of look over their shoulder or watch their back, worry about stepping up in a way where they would be othered. Do you know that word, like pushed away for that? That made the biggest difference in performance and excellence.
Psychological safety, that's quite an important field in our work.
It
Can you
is.
say a little bit more about it?
I can, and then also I knew we would speak about this, so I brought a very few slides that I'd love to show the group if I may. So would the right way to do that be I set this down and then I just use that mic? Okay, great. Be right back. Okay, well, as a person who's really only worked with Apple my whole life, let's just see here. Ah, look it, I did it.
You're never too old to learn something new.
That is the truth. So psychological safety first. Could anyone raise their hand if they're familiar with the term or have heard it used before? Excellent. That's great to know. So psychological safety is defined as a shared understanding by members of any system or team that they are secure for interpersonal risk-taking, that they can actually show up and take risks. Let's see if this works. So the warning signs of psychological danger, and I ask you as you read these and hear these, that you really think within yourself, oh my gosh, have I ever experienced this in the work that I do? That you're afraid of making or admitting mistakes. We all make mistakes, and by the way, all of you mistakes are really hard, but we also know that there is a risk of or a margin of error in whatever work we do. But if you have that fear, as you'll see in the slides about the brain, if you have that fear as you go into any scenario, it changes statistically and even interpersonally the outcome of the scenario. Blaming others, so making excuses rather than owning or taking responsibility for decisions and their impact. What's called the common knowledge effect, which is we've always done it that way. I've heard so much about innovation, not only in this room, but in the conversations I've had with the amazing people out there in the hallway are making some of the most mind-blowing technology, just so inspiring. Can you imagine if you or others in this field took that common knowledge effect of, well, we've always done it this way, so why would we change? Yet that fear of risk-taking is a sign of psychological danger. And then resistance to new or different views. Please, just for a moment, think about times when you have felt that spark, that light of a fantastic idea within you. You've gone and shared it with someone else, and they've said, oh, no, that would never work, or something like that. These are the shutdowns that we never want to have in innovative and high success, excellent organizations. The safety comes when we share ideas openly, where we have a collegial and collaborative way of working with others. When mistakes are made, we can not only admit them, but learn from them, because who are we if we're not learning and continually improving based on our experience? Analysis and learning from failure. We saw a lot of beautiful analysis up there that's all pointed at continuous improvement. And then, of course, all of this leads, you don't need me to tell you, to more successful innovation, impact, and decision-making. So let's talk about how that breaks down through the lens of the brain. A safe brain thinks fully. All of the parts of a brain, when it's in its wonderfully natural state of awareness, curiosity, and receptivity, all of the brain, or much of the brain, is online. Though under threat, we get something that's called the amygdala hijack. A small organelle in the nervous system fires, surging a chemical cocktail throughout the brain and throughout the body that changes everything that happens next. We've all felt that response when we get the chicken skin or that clenching that we feel. But what we may not feel, but is very true, is that threat, whether it's sustained threat or spike threat, something that happens in an instant, changes the way that our brain works. It changes everything in our neurochemistry and everything in the way the brain transmits signals both within the brain and to the body. So we've all heard of the fight or flight response, and it's really bigger than that. It can be fight, which is defend and argue. It can be flight, retreat, freeze, like, what do I do? Or freak out. And we don't want any of those things happening when you are doing this critical work that you all are charged with. So this is, more or less known as the amygdala hijack. And what I want to point out here between the last slide and this, you see that the prefrontal cortex is highlighted in lavender here. But under amygdala hijack, vasoconstrictive reactions within the brain actually cut off the flow of blood, which carries oxygen and glucose to all of the brain, but very much to the hungry PFC. The brain is the hungriest organ in the body. The PFC is the hungriest subset of the brain. So under the amygdala hijack, we lose access to the highest human cognition we have, which is really the programming and direction of our thoughts to allow us to make decisions in effective and beneficial ways. We lose objectivity when the amygdala hijack fires and the PFC goes offline, and we move much more into the reactive mind. Any of you who've read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow know that the reactive way of thinking, what he calls System 1, is much less accurate and much less effective, and I would say in the case of some sorts of work, much more dangerous than System 2 thinking, which is more whole-brained. So Dr. Christine Porath, who's really a leading thinker in the study of psychological safety, says this: if you lack psychological safety, you shut down. You might not even realize it. You are less likely to seek or accept feedback, which means you're locked into biased ways of thinking. You're less likely to experiment, discuss errors, or learn from potential or actual problems. You are much also less likely to be able to think rationally and objectively, which in your work is so critical. So I will leave you, visually at least, and then we'll continue. A safe brain thinks fully. All of you want to be part of cultures where your brain is safe enough to have all of its functions and access online. A brain under threat does not. Thank you.
So, as I said before, psychological safety is really important in our field. What can we do to bring it to our department, hospitals, and everything?
It is so important, and here's what I've learned over quite a bit of time of working on this. Two paths lead to the creation of psychological safety in work environments. One of them is easy and one of them is hard. I could leave it at that. You all want the easy one, right? Okay, let's go with that. The easy one is when it is proactive and intentional. This is when someone in the organization, very often in a leadership position, notices that something is not right, that there could be a hazing. Does this word, do you know this word, a hazing? Like a resistance, or people have to go through a gauntlet, you know, sort of Game of Thrones at the workplace to sort of prove that they are worthy. So that, if a leader notices that happening, if a leader notices uptick in various sorts of behaviors that might be seen as harassment behaviors, bullying behaviors, resistance to new ideas, anything that we saw there, then the leader can come in and say, we need to change. We want a culture where people can thrive and flourish so that we can be as successful and excellent in our work as we want to be. That's the easy path. The hard path is generally not a leadership path. The hard path is when someone is in an incident where something happens that has consequences and impact that actually create a danger for the reputation or the success on other terms of the firm. What I have witnessed with that is that very often then an operational person will come in. Very often lawyers are involved, as they should be if these sorts of things are going on. But now comes the very difficult path of bringing in all of the people to remediate it, paying probably some sort of legal fees and some sort of fine to someone who has been through it. I have seen these two paths. Well, I probably have seen the leadership path not often enough, and the other path far too often, because these things actually damage people and reputations and create consequences that no healthy organization would want. So I want to check my notes here to see if there's anything else that I want to add to that, Rebecca, so just one moment. Yeah, I would say that the two paths are the top-down from leadership or the ones that sort of the bottom-up. Something happens and difficult things need to be orchestrated in order to fix it. So either way, I have noticed some good news, and that is people, when they see the change, embrace the change. And once people start to see, and sometimes there's a little slowness at first because people have to overcome highly entrenched behaviors. They sometimes have to get out of their comfort zone and learn to open their minds to different ways of thinking, different ways of action. Once cultures commit to this, it tends to gain traction. With one caveat, there's one thing, and that is as new members come into any organization, they have to be told and really encouraged from day one. They have to understand what psychological safety is and why it must be adhered to. And once you get new people coming in and adding that to the culture, it is like the movement grows. Let me think. Yeah, and oh, by the way, culturally, in terms of, now I can't speak to hospitals in Switzerland, I don't have enough experience, but with companies that I've worked with in Silicon Valley, when they have adopted and adhered to these principles and these ways of working together, it becomes a differentiator in marvelous ways. Success goes up, it's something that can be measured. Retention, meaning, Silicon Valley's really high turnover. Retention goes up in psychologically safe organizations. Hiring is improved. It's a brand differentiator because people want to work in cultures where they feel that they can do their best work.
So you told us now about the benefits of this psychological safety. So why does not everybody implements this psychological safety in their companies?
Yeah. I think there are many reasons for that. One of them is the studies, they haven't really even been around for that long. I mean, probably many of you are thinking like, well, this is just common sense. Of course this is true. But, at least in the United States, we need a whole lot of data before we do anything in an organization. But I also feel that it can have something to do with leadership. And I want to say that part with a tremendous amount of excellence. So let's imagine that people, I'm only going to speak with Silicon Valley in mind. However, I think there might be some parallels that are relevant for some of you. So imagine that people came in at a time where there was a way that they did things, and they were successful in those cultures. But nothing stays the same, and in fact, change to me seems to be accelerating. And so their ways that had made them successful began to shift. Well, rather than being open to change and taking risk and looking at that change as growth opportunity, they tended to cling to their old way of doing it because it was what was comfortable to them. Comfort, organizationally and probably personally, comfort is unequal to safety. And very often safety is unequal to comfort. Let me say what I mean. If we are comfortable, we may actually make decisions that allow us to avoid confronting real issues, which actually leads to danger. Do you see what I mean? Yeah. And we can even look across the world. We've been really comfortable with some very unsustainable ways of being, of living, of treating our environment and so forth. Comfort is unequal to safety, and safety is unequal to comfort. So very often people, as they go through their career, they begin to see themselves as experts. And when you see yourself as an expert, you tend to lock in on what you already know and stay comfortable with that rather than being open to learning, to change, to growth, and to where that new brilliant person who just came into the office might actually have a way of making me be better. But that means I have to be willing not to be an expert. So I would say that to some extent, expertise and bias, if we're really locked into them, can be the enemy of psychological safety. Now, I also remember that when you and I discussed this question, Rebecca, and maybe it's the next question, but it actually really engaged and activated me to think of how important that openness to discomfort is for people who are doing the work that you're doing. Your work is about continuous improvement and constant learning. That is your quest for excellence. Think about, does your culture support that? Do the people that you report to institutionalize this within your company so that they are as committed to you getting better and better, you reaching that excellence you search for? Are they as committed to you reaching that excellence are they as committed as you are, even if your excellence causes them to go, wow, look, they have their wings now. They're doing even more than I was able to do. And I want to come back. Isn't that part of the purpose of being a human, is to see others rise and to lift each other up? And it is very hard for me when I see organizations, especially high-stakes organizations, not engendering that in their cultures.
If now someone in the room would like to advocate for more psychological safety in the hospital, what can they do? Where should they go?
Ooh, this brings me back to that really difficult two paths question, right? Because I'd want to say, like, okay, if you want to advocate for it because you heard a great conversation, and you're like, yeah, we need more of that, then I think it's a really good time to talk to people who are operational. Like, who are the people in your organizations who are looking at things like continuous learning, or, how culture, human resources, human relationships, or something like that. That would be the ideal path. So really good ways to do it is depending on what sorts of structures are within the organization. How can you have conversations about it? Could you have do you know this concept, brown bag lunch, where people just come together to talk at a table about something? Talk about it, find articles about it, really speak about it. But then the other way is, if there is something that you feel is really preventing you psychologically from taking risks, from growing, to stepping toward excellence, then I think if it's safe to speak with your manager or team lead about it, open up that conversation. If it isn't, I think that's when the other path comes up, where sooner, it's not an if scenario, it's a when scenario, a problem is going to happen. And it is so easy for me to sit up here on stage and talk about this, theoretically and so forth. But I have experienced, even in many companies in Silicon Valley, resistance to this. But, actually, even the first slide I showed is from something. It was a project that Google did at Rework. And may I spend a moment on that?
Yes.
So I did work at Google, and talk about a hazing. Like, before you get hired at Google, I think I was like 53 years old when I got hired at Google. I had to produce my standardized tests from when I was 17 years old to prove I was smart enough to work at Google. And that was after a 20-something year in tech. So in my opinion, when things like that happen, the company is outsourcing their own intelligence to data so that they don't have to take a bet on it. That shows a lack of psychological safety. Do you see? And where they should, like, okay, look what this person's done. Here's how they showed up in the interview, and it seemed like a really good cultural fit. Wow, they also know how to do this. This is a really good person. No. There was not enough psychological safety at that time to actually trust your own assessment. It was outsourced to a test I took when I was 17 years old. It's sort of ridiculous, right? And by the way, I think data is really important. And I think data and other factors can have really interesting conversations that bring a fuller picture than you can get any other way. They work really well together. So, I got off on a little tangent. Will you remind me of the question?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
You talked about different factors. And I don't ask this question, but is there a difference between gender?
Oh, very much so. And this is a field that I spend a lot of time working on because, as it turns out, neuroscientifically, by the brain, female and male brains are actually incredibly different. And
yes, we know.
Yeah, they are different. Though I always say these are a beautiful example of two things that are better together. The way that male brains work functionally and even in terms of the neurochemistry, a little bit skews more to the left hemisphere. And where would we be without the functions and the power of the left hemisphere? Female brains skew a little bit more to a different way of thinking. We even, very different distribution of white matter. Male brains are a little more skewed toward the gray matter, female toward the white matter. They're both super connective. They connect in different ways. And then the female brains are much more about big picture thinking, less of that sort of pursuit of outcomes, more context and so forth. Now this everybody in this room who has a healthy brain, and I have a feeling of extremely healthy brains, you have all of the technologies I've just spoken about, the more male skewed, the more female skewed, but we do tend to have them in slightly different distributions and tend to activate them in different ways more actively. My opinion is, and please anyone challenge me, is that historically the world of work is more male skewed. This is just statistically, it's true, it's just the way that the history works. Women, and there are many other issues involved in this as well, but women function differently in environments that, well, in one talk I give, I have a really great slide. It shows a little clip from YouTube from a show that was in the late 50s, and it shows this guy who actually, he's wearing glasses. He looks a lot like my dad, which is one of the reasons I love the slide. But, he's a businessman, and he's saying, what was it before all these women came into work? Now we can't do things the way we wanted to do things, it's an amazing little slide. It's a quote from a movie in the 50s, but you're right. This is that better together thing, is that when different types of people come into the workforce, we challenge each other's ideas. Yet data, research, everything shows that when we get psychologically safe at challenging each other's ideas, we make better and more successful decisions. It's just a fact. But the traditional ways of disrupting psychological safety may not happen more to women, but they are recognized more by women because they fit into categories like sexual harassment or discrimination, other things that are related to very gender, sex-oriented positions. Whereas with men, it's a little bit different. It can be bullying, it can be hazing, but men, unfortunately, are often raised in a culture where that is normalized, and they think just being a guy, you got to get slapped around a bit or told you're an idiot or whatever else. So these things are more normalized in a culture as just, it's just what the world of business is like. My experience is both of those ways of othering others can be completely removed from organizations through a commitment to psychological safety in ways that elicit excellence from all members of a team and that allow us to work together in ways where we do bring out the best in one another.
Just one short intermezzo. Do you know the YouTube clip about men's brain and women's brain? Mm-hmm. So men, they have a nothing box. I am quite jealous about this nothing box. I don't know what you think.
Wait, they have a what?
A nothing box.
Oh.
A little one here, and this box doesn't touch.
What's that?
I don't know. Perhaps men can help us. I don't know. And women brain, they are doing
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
You have to look this video. It's quite funny.
There are some really good ones, but let me tell you what that is. That's estrogen. For the win. Estrogen is the neurochemical of connection. And in fact, estrogen is so important to the brain over time that when women undergo menopause and their estrogen levels drop, in those years, the brain increases estrogen receptors tenfold so that it can actually get all of the benefit of those connections. Isn't that interesting? And so, yeah, I think women's brains are like, yes, they are more connected than male brains are. Mm-hmm. And I'm really stubborn about this. Like when we open ourselves to the differences between our natural tendencies mm-hmm. as well as our cultural conditioning and so forth, the results of this are. We get so much better together. Mm-hmm. By the way, for the first 300,000 years of human existence, the only way our species survived was through mutuality between each other. There were changes that came about 4,000 years ago with the rise of sort of what we call Western thought and like the Greeks and then the Romans and everything that followed that have benefited humanity in many ways, yet there are some unintended consequences to those ways of being. And very much, I must say that the first 300 years of the rise of Greek culture, the Western world, began with a council culture against the feminine. And this was a reaction to some geophysical events that happened, volcanoes and things like this, which were associated with feminine power. So there was a council against women that has shaped our culture for 3,500 years. I think we're seeing in a lot of things in the world the impact of that shift. And I think there are things we can borrow from our first 300,000 years of survival under very difficult circumstances at times that we could mentally bring to our realm today in ways that would benefit all of us.
Okay. So, do you think, it's just a joke, but when I get in menopause, do you think I can have this nothing box of men? Because I'm really jealous about that.
Well, I got to tell you, I've already been through it and I don't have a nothing box. So.
Okay, no chance.
But I'll still keep practicing, okay? No, actually, I'm going to come back, and I think it's a really key point for this audience. Learning how to create that nothing box, and I love the term, is a really good
Me
idea. Guess what the key is? Breath. Learning really how to take the breath. So when we feel any sort of like overwhelm or hijack or anything coming on, we should know, you saw those slides, that is part of an amygdala hijack. It's a mini, mini little hijack going on. And at that point, we are losing at least some access to our highest cognition. And the irony is when we start to lose the access and then our highest cognition goes offline, we lose it and we lose it and we lose it. It's a slippery slope.
Okay.
Listen to this, you brilliant, brilliant surgeons. You're going to love this. You already figured it out. It's so easy. But if this part of the brain is going offline because of vasoconstriction, and it's not getting enough oxygen, what can we do to help bring it back online?
Breathing?
Hello.
Breathing,
One
okay.
intentional breath. So I love this build. A, B, C. Awareness, A. Oh, look. My brain is spinning. I'm going too fast. Are you giggling?
Right.
Right? We all know that, don't we? Yeah. Okay, or I was about to snap at them. I was going to say something rude to them. Or I just had a big judgment, like they're not good at, like whatever. I'm reacting. Awareness. We feel it in our bodies, right? Awareness, breath, one intentional breath. We bring more oxygen and bring more brain online. Don't we all want more brain online? Yeah.
Might
And
help.
it would help, especially under pressure. One breath changes everything in your neurochemistry and the way that your brain, you have a different brain after a breath than you had before the breath, an intentional breath. And then the third one is curiosity. Curiosity means really wanting to know and understand. It doesn't mean asking a question. It's much more than that. And you can make curiosity either outwardly focused, you can ask a question, or inwardly focused. Why am I reacting as I am? Or why did I react as I did? Moving from reaction to response is a one breath process. A, B, C. The responsive brain is a better brain, most of the time, almost always, than a reactive brain. And after that, you get one more letter, D. You can decide the best course of action next. Now, I want to bring this back to the questions you were having about any sort of hazing or things like that. In a moment, I would never wish this for any of you, but in a moment where you feel like you're being shut down in any way, your body feels it. At that point, rather than react, which is probably all we've ever been taught to do, take one breath and then ask curiously. I'll give you a great question. And now you are responding. So imagine, Rebecca, that somebody were to say something that felt insulting or threatening in some way, and you took one breath and you simply said to that person with calmness, say more about that.
I will try it the next time, but
Everything would change, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
And this is something so important to know about the brain and about life. Everything changes everything. None of us in this room have the same brain right now that we had when we walked in that room, whenever we walked in. Your brain is constantly documenting your life experience so that it can know how to keep you breathing and alive. That's its job. And so it's taking in all of this information and it's always updating those maps. So we can constantly move to growth in the brain, in any healthy brain, simply by opening up our awareness and letting the brain update its code. If you remember and if you practice within the next few days that ABC, awareness, breath, and curiosity, your brain will do more of whatever it's doing right now and make that more available to you after repetition. You know, my favorite explanation I heard in Austria, and it was a great one to hear in Austria, but someone said to me, oh, it's almost like sledding. The first time you go down that hill, the snow sort of, you know, it sort of pushes against you, and snow does back in the United States too. It must be a snow thing. But the first time you're kind of pushing it a little bit. Second time it's a little smoother. By the time you've gone down a few times, you're just flying. That is the way the brain works, for better and for worse, right? Because it does show that we can habituate new things if we go through the initial resistance, which is, even if it's ABC, awareness, breath, the first times you practice it, oh, I wish I'd remembered to do that. Or, oh gosh, next time I'll do it this way. It's a little bit of resistance from the brain. But you are actually rewriting your brain's code, and you're making it less easy for it to go down the old habitual and reactive course. This is the lifelong gift of neuroplasticity. Yeah.
This neuroplasticity, does it go down when you get older, or?
It's different when you get older. And it doesn't necessarily, in a healthy brain, it doesn't necessarily go down. You may have to work with the brain in different ways. I'm really looking right now, for obvious reasons, at new ways of working with elder brains. I recently did, do you all know TEDx talks? You know what those are? It should be out within a week or two, I hope. I'm really looking forward to seeing. But I recently did a TEDx talk on something that was in a new subject field for me, that something very different than I've ever spoken about or really worked on before. And I had so much trouble memorizing this 1,200-word talk. Oh my gosh, I really did. And I remember driving home from my first practice, which went terribly, going, oh my gosh, is this age-related and so forth? And I thought, no, I need to work with my brain in a different way than I could just, sort of rely on in the past. So I created a different sort of framework for memorizing this talk. And I learned so much about the elder brain as I did it. It doesn't work the same way that it did, 10 or 20 years ago. There must be a reason for this on species level, survival sort of level. And I did a little research on that too, and really loved what I learned. But you do move from less of an intelligence brain to more of a wisdom brain. And so you're connecting and working with information in a different way. And I had a lot of fun learning about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have only another few minutes. Time is running. But will you speak about that topic in your TED speech?
No, well, maybe my next one.
Yes.
No, the talk was actually about what we can learn from ancient ways of living as humans that can serve this time and also a more sustainable future. However, I do have a podcast, the Brain and Beyond podcast, and my next episode will be about the memory hacks that I used to memorize this speech at age 66, which was very different than memorizing a talk at a younger age.
Okay, but that will be quite interesting as well for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's a neat topic. Thank you.
Would you have some more advice for the end of your speech, for our
yes.
daily business?
What if you were to look at your work as you were part of weaving something that made others better because they worked with you, and that you really expected to be made better by those you worked with, and you used your criteria for evaluating the people that you collaborated with, and that's about mutuality and rising together. Identify in your mind who are the people who help you be great in your life, and identify in your mind who are the people where you sort of maybe cringe or hesitate a bit before you walk into their office. Choose more of the ones who are there to make you great, and then challenge any resistance you're getting from those who don't seem to want to do that for you. There's no math to this, but I've heard many, many times, it's psychologically, we are each the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. So choose those 5 people very wisely, and make sure that you are being everything you know you're capable of being with the 5 people you work most closely with.
That's an important point, because this morning as well, we talked about mentorship.
Yes.
and how and where to find these mentors. And I think that's really a good point for closing our speech, because yes, we need mentors, we need role models as well in our field.
Indeed.
Ellen, thank you very
so
much.
much. Thank
It
you
was
all
great.
very, very much. Thank you.